This is the Town of Hilton Head Island Accommodation Tax Advisory Committee training workshop. So this meeting is now called to order. This is not a business meeting. This is a workshop. This is an informational and educational situation, and there will be no business conducted today. Madam Secretary, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are.
Is there any need? We don't need to really call a roll, do we? This is not a formal meeting. Okay.
You're not in FOIA compliance, by the way. You are not. Just, I want you to let you know that. I'm not here to disrupt. I'm just here to educate. You're not in FOIA compliance.
But you did interrupt. Item number 3 on the agenda is the overview of Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee role, our responsibilities, and a member from the Municipal Association of South Carolina, Ashley Callahan. Is that you, Ms. Callahan?
That's me. Yes, sir.
All right, please.
I'm gonna get my presentation pulled up here. Okay, can you all hear me okay? I'll scoot over and speak into the mic. All right. Trying to get my bearings. Nope, that's not working. All right, Ashley Callahan. I am a field services manager with the Municipal Association. And so me and my 2 colleagues, we offer technical assistance to all 271 of our cities and towns. And we offer a lot of trainings to councils and bodies such as yours. So I am happy to be here and help out. And I understand we have some new members on the committee. So this is probably some of what I'm going over is new to you all, and some of it you've heard a lot of times, so I'm just going to go through it. Accommodations tax. So it's like a sales tax. Our state collects an additional 2% charge on all accommodations across the state. In addition to that, municipalities and counties can also charge an additional A tax not to exceed 3% each. So the town of Hilton Head Island collects 3%, and then Beaufort County also collects 3%, in addition to what it receives from the state. And what we're going to focus on, what I'm going to focus on with you all is the state accommodations tax, because that is the portion of the funds that you all are charged with doling out to the community. So again, 2% A tax, it is collected by the Department of Revenue, and then it is remitted back to all of our cities and counties by a certain formula. And the state defines accommodations as the rental or charges for any rooms. And you can see that laundry list right there. I mean, really it covers the gamut of anything you can, imagine, campgrounds, really any sort of lodging experience that someone would have. So a municipality that receives more than $50,000 in revenue from the state A tax, Hilton Head is one of those, must appoint an advisory committee to make recommendations on how that revenue generated should be spent within your community. And so that's why we're here today, and that is why this board exists. All right, so state law dictates that you all have to have 7 members. The majority of you are selected from the hospitality industry. At least 2 from the hospitality industry must be from the lodging industry. And then 1 member must represent the cultural organizations of Hilton Head Island. So you are charged with annually meeting and submitting written recommendations to town council at least once a year. The report addresses how to spend the portion of A tax that remains after allocations are made to the general fund and the tourism promotion funds. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But the municipal council then, they may accept the recommendations you present, they may reject them, they may amend them. And then council is then charged with submitting an annual report to the state A tax. There's actually a committee, it's a state Tourism Expenditure Review Committee, and they have to review that report every year. So going back to the portion of the funds from the A-tax that you all look at, so that first 25,000 that a city gets goes immediately to the general fund. And then 5% of that remaining balance also goes to the general fund. 30% of that same remaining balance is allocated to a special fund, and it is only used for advertising and promotion of tourism that will develop and increase tourist attendance through the generation of publicity. So a city will appoint certain groups or select one or more organizations rather, and these groups are like your Chamber of Commerce, a visitor convention bureau. On James Island where I live, the town designates their 30% to CCPRC, the Parks and County Recreation and Tourism Group, that do a lot of events throughout the year, bringing people into the community. And so that remaining 65% must be allocated to a special revenue fund and used for tourism-related expenditures. And I also just want to note, a tourist is generally defined as someone that lives at least 50 miles from home. So we're not talking super far away. It can be someone pretty close to this area, but is still traveling at least some distance to come within your community. So state law lists out all of these areas that this 65% can be spent on. And the reason I've highlighted the first four is because these four really makes the most sense as far as more appropriate to what Hilton Head Island is doing and the sort of applications you all will be seeing. So that's advertising and tourism promotion to develop and increase tourist attendance through publicity, arts and cultural events promotion, construction, maintenance, and operation of facilities for civic and cultural activities. Now, this includes construction and maintenance of access and other nearby roads and utilities. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, the pretty stuff. It can be just, infrastructure, right, to help support, that tourist industry. And then, law enforcement, fire protection, solid waste collection, things that also are impacted, keeping up with tourism. And really, when you're thinking about this and looking through those applications, what you want to say to yourself, and if y'all have been on the board a while, you've heard this, is this putting heads in beds? Is what they are bringing forth going to actually draw more people into our community and have them stay at a local hotel? That's whatever sort of, housing situation they're doing. Is it going to bring people in? Or are they going to be spending the night? That's kind of really what you want to keep fresh in your head, because that's what's generating this revenue and that's what's putting it, back out into the community. So there is a new clause, and this is on your agenda as the next item I'm talking about, and it's kind of wrapped up into this one. But I first want to say this workforce housing component, I don't know would be here if it wasn't for Hilton Head Island. So the island really pushed this, and it was wonderful. I mean, the town really got behind this. Senator Davis and urged Senator Davis to sponsor this bill and get it written. And so now we have another alternative of which these expenditures are allowed. They are allowed to develop workforce housing and promote home ownership. So how is that defined by the state? Workforce housing means something appropriately priced for rent or sale. The income needs to fall within 30% to 120% of the median income for the local area. There are stipulations, of course, though. You may not exceed more than 50% of your annual allocation on the local side, on the local accommodations tax revenue side. And there is a sunset clause of 2030. Not to say that it could be renewed after that, but usually with new clauses, we like to kind of, the state likes to really see how it goes. Now, some of the restrictions. So if the city proposes to use its state A-tax towards workforce housing, it must first complete a housing impact analysis. And it's my understanding that the town is in that process now. It's not ready yet. Mr. Gruber may want to comment on this a little bit more.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes. Shortly after the legislation was adopted and signed by the governor, we began sitting down and looking at what those requirements call for. Because it's so new, we're still trying to figure out what all of those elements are. But we've engaged the services of Tammy Hoy Hawkins, who's an expert in workforce housing in the state, and she's helping us to craft that housing impact analysis.
Great. So that will be available to you all, and that will make it, make you all eligible where you're able to actually review those applications for workforce housing in the future. Now, I want to skip gears a little bit. This committee is charged with the state accommodations tax, but you will get asked questions about the local accommodations tax, that 3% I mentioned earlier that the town collects, separate from what it receives from the state. I know 1% of what the town collects is dedicated towards beach preservation and renourishment. The other 2% goes into a fund that can be spent under these areas. And these 6 areas are also the same areas that hospitality taxes are also evaluated under. So this is separate than what you all will be doing, but just wanted to make you aware. And then also, of course, with the local, there is a workforce housing component available to it as well. And with that, the restriction on the local use is in the comprehensive plan that every city and town has. There's, I think, 9 elements of that comp plan. One of the elements is a housing element. And so within that housing element, you must solicit the input from local home builders, developers, contractors, financial experts in developing that element in order to be able to use your local A-tax for this workforce housing purpose. Now, some communities have already done that. Some communities may not have fleshed it out enough and may feel they want to go back to the drawing board before they really delve into the workforce housing component. And then just real quick, on the local side, counties collecting at least $900,000 in state accommodations tax. Your county is one of them. You may use those local accommodation and hospitality taxes for the operation and maintenance of police, fire, emergency medical. I know the city of Charleston dedicates a lot of their A-tax and H-tax dollars towards the, policing and protection of the downtown Market Street area, south of Broad area. And then there are some other changes not too long ago. And the last one is more relevant, where A-tax and H-tax proceeds can be pledged for security for revenue bonds to really help invest in those long-term, larger scale projects. All right, does anyone have any questions? And I know that we're on a time crunch, so we may be saving those till later, not sure.
Question. As a committee, you anticipate under this legislation that we would be seeing applications from not-for-profits, or is this just under the SB 284, the workforce housing? Would we be seeing not-for-profits making applications for these? Anticipate that?
I think potentially. I'm not too sure. Josh may have a better idea of the local groups that would be applying for that here.
My understanding is that based upon the legislation that was passed, there's nothing that would prohibit an entity from requesting such funds. Now, whether the committee would make that recommendation and then ultimately if town council would approve that recommendation from a policy standpoint, those are unknowns. But at this point, it would be an eligible expenditure under the state accommodations tax legislation.
Just to further on that question, clarification, does an applying organization have to be not-for-profit
On the workforce housing,
in general?
in general? No, I don't believe so. Josh, do you know the answer to that?
So we happen to have the town attorney with us today.
Okay, good.
So I'm going to default to him on that one, because this question has come up previously, and I think maybe an opinion had been provided at some point.
I know there's an Attorney General's opinion, I think from 1985 on that. I have it in my file.
Correct.
It
So-
says for-profit organizations cannot, so I'm assuming that it just means that not-for-profits or nonprofits are the only ones that can.
I seem to recall that was the, but I think what we may need to do, the question was whether for-profit corporations or entities could request grants under this program. So I think what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, rather than putting Curtis on the spot to come up with something that may not be all that fresh in anybody's mind, I'm confident there was a previous opinion that went around that. We'll look to get that opinion and we'll circulate it to the committees. I'll have to
All right,
comment that.
thank you.
One other follow-up, is it likely that the analysis for workforce housing would be complete in time for this year's application?
In terms of the housing impact analysis, I don't think so. Part of it is there's a number of elements that were identified that need to be included in that report that aren't really clear in terms of, you can't just go to someplace, grab a number and bring it back. So because this is the first time we're putting something together, not only do we want to make sure that we're running it through entities locally. So for example, we've been working closely with the Home Builders Association because this is housing impact analysis, and a lot of the data that it calls for is related to impacts to building costs, housing supply, and things like that. So because this is the first time that we're doing it, we're wanting to make sure we get the data that's actually called for. So to directly answer your question, I think it's still going to be probably a couple months before we have that ready.
So if the housing impact study is just one study, it's not done by project, correct?
Correct. It's the town's study that it
And
has
how
to
often does
conduct.
that have to be revised?
That's a good question. I don't know that the law addresses that. Now, on the local ATAC side, it's going to have to at least be reviewed every 5 years because it's a part of the comprehensive plan process. But on the state ATAC side, that's a good question. I don't think it's specifically outlined in state law that there is any sort of requirement.
Correct. It essentially makes it a prerequisite that before any funds can be appropriated, the study must be performed, and then it lists a number of entities that the study has to be delivered to prior to being allowed to make that reward. But it does not say anything about it has to be updated annually or it has to be done every time. So what we're hopeful for is that once we have it in place, it'll be in place for the duration of this initial period, which appears to be a 7-year kind of trial window.
If the town, that 15% that can go towards housing, if the town took that money, they can disperse that money to any of those nonprofit organizations separately from them having to apply with the ATAX committee, correct? So for example, if the town had $1 million that they took in ATAX, they could disperse it to a nonprofit like Habitat, and instead of Habitat coming to us and filing its own application.
I mean, yes, because the town has a portion of it that it receives outside of what comes to you all for applications. It has, and also on the local side as well. So
Here a little bit later on, our finance director, John Troy, is going to go over some of the historical revenues and expenditures within the accommodations tax program. And you'll see that there's only been a portion that's kind of come through this committee as grants. The total ATAX expenditures is actually much larger.
Lastly, typically when, if you took ATAX money to bond out for a cultural center, how does that work? Where does the application for that come from? Or is that a town staff would?
that would be a town staff type project, yes.
Any other questions from members of the committee at this point?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just whenever.
Go ahead.
Just whenever. I mean, if I, look, I've been studying this.
You have a question, or are you going to make a
I came
speech?
to help as best I can. Are we going to require, or is there going to be a requirement to sign contracts like tax recipient agreements, with either the DMO or even the nonprofits, which will help them give them an agreement that spells out the legal use and how the money must be used and how the money must be reported. I think that's a very simple thing that the lawyers could put together, and that's just one recommendation. I have others, but I understand this is not a platform for a speech. I understand we're just doing questions here today. That's why I came to help. But I have been studying this, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think I know a little bit more about this than the lawyers we have on staff, and I'm not trying to degrade them, but I've just been studying it for 25 years. So I'm here to help. So anybody who wants to ask me a question, I would happy to answer that for you as a citizen and somebody that
All right,
came here to
we'll move on now to item 5 of the agenda, which is the review of the collections and expenditures historic reviews.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a little discussion. Let's see if I can get. See if I can get this off of here. We have an extra menu on our screen.
There, oh,
Let's just try this from the beginning. There we go. Okay, preliminary ATAX discussion. Thank you for having us today. Thank you for an opportunity to talk about this. I think it's just kind of set the stage for who does what. Ashley, thank you for providing a little bit of background. State law gives us guidance. State law gives us a framework to have all of these discussions and this whole process. Staff, we support the committee, we support town council in all of these activities. The Accommodations Tax Committee, you're a platform that you can receive information, study information, make recommendations to town council. Town council then makes those decisions and sets policy for the town. And so that's our start off. We heard it today. Thank you, Ashley. State collects the money, state distributes the money, and state provides the guidance on the funds. Local distribution, again, state law says this, and we've been through this. The town is under contract with our current DMO until 2025. And so that is just a piece of background information. If you're going to look at a pie chart of the distribution, here's our distribution. Here's our last several years of revenues, and you can see 2020 was our COVID year, and we saw a little drop off, and 21 surprised us in a good way, 22 surprised us in a good way, 23 includes an estimate for the rest of the year, but we're slightly off of where we were last year, but we've made significant increases since 2020, but we're not quite as high as 2022. So you kind of give a preview of what we're going to be considering later. How has it been spent? We've spent on grants, we've spent on capital improvements, we have a couple of things come through the capital plan. We've had general fund support of tourism services and of course our grants. And so those numbers have increased significantly in the last couple of years with the increase in collections. You put the revenues with the spending, and this will give you just a little bit of history, and we'll make sure that this is provided to everybody. But our spending is caught up with our revenues, and we'll see how this works out for this year. Last year, the committee recommended awarding of $5,033,000 in grants. Town council had a slightly different opinion and awarded $4,006,000 in grants. And so that's normally the process. The committee does a lot of work. The committee does a lot of review and hearings, and they make that recommendation, and then town council takes those recommendations under advisement. They deliberate, and then they make the final decision at the council level. Just a little bit of history, and we'll make sure everybody has copies of this, but these are the different organizations since 2019, how much was awarded. We did have an out-of-cycle award in 2021, but usually it's just once a year. So we go through this process one time a year. Grants are awarded, and then we come back the next year. it's 2 pages worth, so it's a lot of work for the committee. There's a lot of proposals. These are the ones that were funded, and so that doesn't include the ones that were not funded. And so that's a lot of information to go through. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your service. It does the town a great service for all the work that the committee does. A timeline, there's a lot there. We've had some comments about how many meetings do you really need? There's actually a lot of work that needs to be done, and you can see some of this work started in April. Consideration of the DMO marketing plan, the adoption of the application, the setting of the meeting dates happened April, and so not everybody who's here now was here back in April, and so that's when this was set up. July, we got in our new board members. July 31st, our grant applications opened. Last week, we had an informational meeting with applicants, and so that was, I hope it was real helpful for the applicants, and that will reap the benefits of that information in the grant applications. And so hopefully that will help the committee as well with what they sort through and what they need to evaluate. Today, it's for committee members and council members. We have our chairman of our finance and administrative committee here. We have our mayor here as well. And so we're certainly appreciative of the attention for the accommodations tax process. September 1 is a due date. And so Mr. Chairman is very adamant about our due dates. And so that message has been sent, and we hope that has been received loud and clear. September 28th, we have on the schedule a preliminary meeting to review applications. So it's an opportunity to kind of get together, see what we have, are they all complete, and what do we need to see and hear from those hearings. October 12th and 19th are the hearings. The applicants will present their story. They'll present their ask for to supplement the written grant application. They'll be able to tell the story and the color of the story that the committee can help consider. And then November 2nd, we have it on the schedule. The committee will make a recommendation for those grants to town council. We'll run a spreadsheet and make sure that it totals with what's available. And then December 5th, town council will take those recommendations. We'll help, and that's part of what our administrative help will be, is we'll help craft the letter that goes from the committee to town council to say, here's our recommendations and here's the process that we went through, so that town council will have a full understanding of the work that this committee was able to do and an understanding of the committee's recommendations. And so then town council will follow that up and take that under advisement and consider that in their December 5th meeting. There's more beyond the grants. And so coming up in March, the DMO marketing plan and the budget will be received. April, the committee can hear from the DMO on the budget and the marketing plan. And then eventually the committee is going to make recommendations to town council about those. And in the same process as the grants, the committee is into the process, very much into the details. They hear the proposals and they consider the proposals and make a recommendation to town council, and then town council will consider that recommendation from this committee. And so town council certainly appreciates the work that the committee does in the springtime too. It's very important work. So I hope that we've provided a framework, and if you have any comments or questions.
Thank you. Beginning your last point, is it possible to know the town's priorities? Because the council in the past years has made this committee has made recommendations, and then council may have lowered them in some cases. So is it advisable or helpful to know the town's priorities for our consideration? Because there hasn't been an opportunity to say, why or explain the difference.
Right, and thank you for your question, and it's been kind of linear. The committee does its work, and then council does its work, and they don't necessarily overlap that much. And I feel like this meeting today is a really helpful start. We've got our finance committee chair, we've got our mayor here, we have our town manager here. And so I think that provides at least a framework for an open discussion about that. So the committee and town council have a good understanding of each other. They're both independent bodies, but yes.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with that. I think where you're coming from is we spend a lot of time considering these recommendations and then we pass them forward. And if they're not falling in line with where town council is, we don't want to feel like we're spinning our wheels and wasting our time and making recommendations that don't make sense to town council. So making sure we're on the same page, that we're making recommendations that fall in line with where town council stands. I think that's our ultimate goal. We don't want to do something that is counterproductive to what town council is trying to do as well.
Great, thank you for your comment. And just know that the vast majority of decisions made by town council are affirming what the committee has recommended, the vast majority. Sometimes they have some slight differences, but usually they're just slight differences.
In that regard, we have opportunities here to fund operating costs as well as capital projects.
That's
It might be
correct,
helpful
yes.
to have some guidance at some point from the town where the priorities may be, because the capital are obviously large investments, but then they stop. Go back to moving that money into operating for other people, or do we continue providing capital to other organizations? As town council takes a look at it, it'd be helpful to have some guidance on that.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
The supplemental DMO, would that pass through this committee as well?
It would.
And as far as what town council may prioritize, would the strategic plan be our guide for something like that?
We hope it would be helpful.
One other question, back to the workforce housing component. When it does become applicable, will those dollars come out of the 65% pot? Am I clear? The 65% of the taxes that are allocated for tourism expenditures. Will the workforce component come out of that pot?
It could. Mhm.
So potentially the 65% would be 50%.
It could. There haven't been any proposals, but that could be something that the committee would consider if there were an application. It could be something the town council
One
could
of the
consider.
supplementals, there could be requests for workforce.
Right. And so I would not be surprised by both bodies taking up requests that would eventually go by that. Of course, like our deputy town manager talked about, is like we're still in the early part of doing the study, and we'll have to remit the study to the appropriate authorities before we're able to even consider it. But it's in process and on the way.
Follow-up. I haven't been a part of the supplemental grant process, so could you briefly describe how does that happen if there's a need for supplemental?
It's my personal opinion. This is me. I'm just here to support. You can generally do the work and make the priorities. One time is enough. There have been some agencies that have made an appeal and had their appeal heard and were successful in achieving funding. But I think on an annual basis is probably a more fair way. Everybody has an opportunity to apply, and all grants are on a level playing field, and all grants are considered at the same time. And that's just me personally, in my opinion.
But that supplemental grant is just kind of leaves the door open for somebody to come back in and say, hey, we have a new opportunity we'd like to tap into.
Right, and there might be, something that wasn't even considered in the fall, and now there's an opportunity in the spring, and the committee or town council may want to consider it. And so, yes, thank you for your comment.
Can you tell me, out of that 65%, is there frequently money left over, or is it all used?
It's generally been the approach is to use everything that's available. I think the approach has been these funds are there to promote the island, and let's make sure that we fully utilize it.
Is it usually sent, I mean, is it usually used by the grants, or is there leftover that goes back to the general fund?
No, it's held to, it's in the accommodations tax fund. And so just what goes into the general fund is just what is a normal use of the funds that would promote the tourisms.
I'm just
So-
trying to wonder how that 15% might affect current people that are awarded from the 65%. See an impact there, or do you think that it will be minimal?
Well, no, it's a matter of priorities. And so the committee and town council will have an opportunity to consider, you'll have a long list. There's usually, the last couple of years have been in a good way because revenues have been able to fund the grants as well as they have been. In previous years, there's been a lot more time in cuts. And so it's a matter of what's the most important use of the funds. And so I think that will enter into the discussions. Okay, we got to balance workforce housing with advertising and promotion of events. And they're all good and positive things for the town. And this is where the crux and the difficult part of the recommendations come in is like, okay, what would be the most important priority because they're all good?
Just to follow up on that, you said last year there was $13 million, and then 65% of that is roughly $8 million. And our recommendation was around $5 million. That extra $3 million, does that go into a pot again for more publicity and marketing of the island? But when is that money tapped into?
Some of
Where
that
does it
money,
go?
some of that money was used by the town to support tourist services like fire rescue. Fire rescue, we have a larger fire rescue department than we would were it not for tourists. And so the town gets some funding through its general fund. And also the town used some money for the capital plan to enhance the pathway system. And so that's what happens.
So the town might see that extra money sitting there, and then they'll decide how to spend it, as opposed to it not being in the original budget, correct?
Well, in the case of the pathways and in the case of, support of tourist services, it's a part of the budget discussions that the town council goes through in the springtime. But yes, it's, when we get to a point where it's one pie, and it's a matter of prioritizing that pie in the most effective manner. And the committee's got some hard choices, and the town council has some hard choices.
I mean, we've been extremely fortunate that we've had the additional revenues to be able to make recommendations to pretty much every organization that it makes sense to. So curious if that can become a rainy day. I know there's only a 2-year.
Yeah, state law provides for 2 years, yes.
In the case that we don't have enough funding for an applicant year, a cycle, are those funds still available, or have they already been spent by the town working on different things like police, fire departments, and bike paths? So it's not a rainy day fund for us anymore. We're kind of without it.
My expectation would be is that this new year is going to be not like 2021, 2022, which were unusually good, where it's going to be more like 2019, 2020, where we're spending everything that we do, everything that we have each year. And so I don't think it's going to be off. I think our last numbers were, not dramatically down, but just a little bit down. And so they're still, from a historical sense, better than normal. We just had 2 outstanding years.
That money, when the town spends that money, still goes to the same purposes that are defined in the A tax, though, correct?
Yeah, it's got to support tourism, yes.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Jeffrey?
I think where a lot of confusion
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, let me interject real quick. If you're going to speak, we would ask you to please come up. Just give us your name and, there you go. Thank you.
Jeffrey Reeves. My question is, I think a lot of confusion that happens in the law where it delineates where it could be spent and used for is, it states, however, a county or municipality may not expend or dedicate more than 15% of its annual local accommodations tax revenue for the purposes set forth in this item. And then the moratorium in 2030. I think it's the use of word local that has confused a lot of people in this, even though it probably means the state income tax returning back to the local municipality. But 15% of its annual, is it the annual total? Or is it 15% of the 65%? That's not well outlined.
Yep, and that was in the most recently adopted legislation. If you go back to what was ultimately passed, there are two separate statutory sections in the South Carolina Code, one for state A taxes and the other for local A taxes. I believe that language capping the amount at 15% is present in both statutory sections.
It's the same language.
It's the same language for both, and it's specifically for workforce housing allocations.
Right, I understand that, but is it 15% of the total revenue or 15% of the 65%?
I believe it's going to be 15% of the 65% because when you read down through the statute, you start at the top and it says you're going to take 5% off the top, or I'm sorry, 25,000 off the top. Then you have your other distributions. And so by the time you get to the 65%, that's when then it's capped at 15%.
Okay. As long as we're clear. That's all.
Actually, do you have an answer for that? Because would it be, so the 30% that goes to the DMO and the 5% and then the $50,000, that's all off the boards? And so it's only the 15% of the 65%?
That was that was what I was asking, alluding to, with that extra money being there, using those rough numbers, 15% of that 65% would have given us $1.2 million to grant towards workforce housing, still not affecting the $5 million we were to recommend for our organizations. So thank you. That was my question as to what is that fund used for? Because I think we have a lot of questions on, cutting 15% off of the available funds for our organizations. Historically, I think that puts a lot of people on edge, and that's where the question was. So I wanted to point out that for the past several years, we've had significant funds to be able to fund everybody. That additional 15%, we still have plenty of funds there to work towards workforce housing.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda deals with our bylaws and rules of procedure. Coltrane.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Curtis Coltrane. I am the town attorney, and I've been asked to speak to you on 4 issues related to your service as a member of this committee. Before we begin, though, previously there was a question about the not-for-profit, and in fact, that is something that we researched 2 years ago. And I had to go look at it in order to recall it. But there was a project, and the ATAX statute itself, just 6410, does not include a prohibition on grants to for-profit entities. That has been litigated in South Carolina, but not to a final conclusion. There was a case coming out of Myrtle Beach where grants were made to 2 for-profit entities. The board in Myrtle Beach turned it down. That was appealed. No, excuse me, they were made. The Turk committee statewide deducted an amount from the Myrtle Beach allegation because it thought they were improper. That was appealed to the administrative law court. The administrative law judge found that the plain language of the statute did not include a prohibition on grants to for-profit entities. That was appealed to the South Carolina Court of Appeals. While that was pending, the folks in Myrtle Beach were successful in a lobbying effort to get their funds restored. And at that point, the Court of Appeals found that the matter was now moot because they had their money and the case ended. So the short answer is that the language of the statute doesn't prevent it. The longer answer is it is an unsettled question. I did speak at the time, this was again 2 years ago, to John Hafer, who is a lawyer in Columbia who has for years advised the statewide Turk. And he said that the question had not come up again, but that what the statewide committee had done following the Myrtle Beach case was to focus its attention on whether or not any expenditure was in fact a tourism-related expenditure as defined by the statute, as opposed to spending too much time focusing on who got the allocation. So the short answer is it is an open question, although it appears to be that the statute, the statute doesn't prohibit it, and it appears that at least now this body of the constituted body of the Turk isn't focusing on that. Does that mean that it's, settled? It does not. I don't believe it's settled.
And Turk doesn't give any advisory opinions.
It does not. So it has been tried once, resulting in a non-decision, unfortunately.
We know if anybody is doing it and it just hasn't been tried? If any other committees are giving out money like that?
Honestly, I don't know. Again, what Mr. Hafer told me is that the focus of the committee had shifted to the nature of the expenditure as opposed to the nature of the recipient. And again, sorry, I didn't remember that off the top of my head, but we were able to pull it up, and that's what it said. So, with that, I've been asked to speak on 4 issues, being meeting quorum, communications amongst committee members and the public records, and executive session matters. The first one is the easiest one, which is a quorum. Your own rules require that a quorum is a majority of the members of the committee. That is consistent with the town code, which is what is required of town council, meaning that you have 7?
Missing one.
Your quorum is 4. If you do not have a quorum, you cannot conduct any substantive business. There are a couple of things you can do if you meet and don't have a quorum, and one of those is to try and gain a quorum. The members of the committee can contact other members and find out where they are and see if they can come to the meeting to generate a quorum. You can also move to adjourn pending the collection of a quorum or the next meeting, but you cannot conduct any substantive business in the absence of a quorum. You simply can't act. So, if only 3 show up, the only thing that you can do that might enable you to move forward would be to see if you can get another member to appear at that time. Otherwise, the only thing you can do is adjourn and wait until you have a quorum to conduct your business. The next 2, really the next 3, communications amongst committee members and the public records and executive session are all kind of a piece. They're all Freedom of Information Act issues. Communications amongst committee members and the public records are really simply explained in this way. All committee business, all documentation and written communication by and between members and members of the public related to committee business is a public record. It does not matter what device the communication might be on if a member is conducting the committee's business either with another committee member, with town hall, or with a member of the public. It is a public record. And I know that cell phones and email in computers has lessened people's need to feel that such communication ought to be more formal than not. To the extent that it is possible, you should treat all that you do, your emails, your texts. The only thing I would say there is stop sending texts. It's just not a good way to conduct your business. It's hard to keep track of. It's hard to recover and make sense of it once you've done that. If you can avoid that, I would recommend that you do that. There's no requirement that you avoid doing that. To me, as a person who has to come along later and gather all of this material up and try to make sense of it, it's difficult. With email, treat it as formal correspondence, because that's what it is. If you can avoid the temptation to add one more email to a string that's already got 500 on it, please do that. Do them separately. I know at the moment that is harder to do and more cumbersome, but at the end of the day, it is less cumbersome if anyone ever has to pull it all together and make sense of it. Again, there's no requirement that anyone do that, but I would just, when you're conducting the committee's business, again, it is the public's business. It is something that the public has the right to see, and therefore the more organized and followable, if such a word exists, it's better for everyone. Again, it is formal, it is public. Please treat it that way. Again, doesn't matter the device. If you send it on your personal phone and it is committee business, it is the public's business. And so again, when you're communicating between and among yourselves and with members of the public, formalize it, because it is formal business correspondence and it should be treated that way. Again, with the public records, everything that you do for the committee is a public record. Again, doesn't matter what device it generates from. If it is the committee's business and it generates a record, that record is a public record. Some things that you do may be subject to other privileges, such as the attorney-client privilege, if such a thing happens as you go through your business, but that doesn't mean it's not part of the public's record. Whether it's subject to a privilege is a separate question. So again, my comment is really everything that you do for the committee is a public record, may be subject to a privilege. Most of it will not be. And so the more formal, the more businesslike you can keep it is to your benefit. Executive session matters. I don't know how frequently this committee has occasion to go into executive session, but if you do, for receipt of legal advice or something similar to that, what happens in executive session is subject to a privilege. That privilege can be broken by any member speaking about what happened in the executive session to any person who wasn't there. So when you are in executive session, you must, you go in with an agenda. For example, it is to receive legal advice on some issue. While you're in executive session, your discussion is limited to what is posted on the agenda. You discuss that issue. You cannot vote in executive session if there is a matter that is to be voted on. You have your discussion about it, you receive your advice, you return to the public meeting and take whatever vote the members deem appropriate for them to take. You don't do it in executive session. You can receive advice on a matter that you're going to vote on, but you can't take the vote there. And again, once you remove yourselves from executive session, in order to maintain your privilege, then what you discussed in executive session remains confidential. That is for your benefit and the benefit of whoever you are representing, in this case, the town on the matter. Because if you can't receive, legal advice, subject to the same privilege that any other person who receives legal advice gets it. You know, they're in a whole lot of, you know, you can't do too much with that. So what you have to do is just be careful when you've gone into executive session to do nothing that breaks the privilege of the executive session. And while you're in executive session, you limit your discussion to the things that are on the agenda that you set to go into executive session, and then come back out and take, if there is a vote, take that in public. I mean, the rules are not difficult. Sometimes in practice, adhering to them becomes more difficult, but the rules themselves are not difficult. Those are the 4 subjects I was asked to cover. I've done it fairly quickly. If there is something you expected me to cover and I didn't, I'm happy to take your questions now and say yes.
Ed Keith?
Comment on conflicts of interest. So for example, if a member of this committee is a supporter or a volunteer with an organization that's presenting a grant application, how do you deal with that? Just disclosure?
If a member of the committee has a personal interest in an applicant, and by personal interest, that really means financial, then that member would be required to recuse his or herself from any consideration of that question. If a member is, a constituent member of an applicant, you may not have a personal interest in it, but my view is that that member should recuse themselves because of, if nothing more, the appearance that there could be some bias or interest that is undisclosed that is affecting that member's vote. It's not that I am suggesting that being a member necessarily leads to that, but in the case of the appearance of a conflict, to me, the better course is always to sidestep the issue and recuse on that question. I mean, it was like, y'all don't know this, I was served on the bench for a while, and there were times when people would ask me to recuse myself, and I never fought to stay on something where anyone might think there's some issue of an interest or bias. I mean, there wasn't, and with any member here, there likely won't be. On the other hand, if the issue is there, I just think it's better to avoid the issue. It protects the integrity of what the board does.
So if you're a contributor to an organization, you should abstain from voting on that organization?
If you've contributed to an organization, I would disclose that. I think that's different from being an active member of an organization. For example, does the Arts Center take donations? If you make a donation to the Arts Center, I don't think that, reflects any bias on your part. I'd disclose it that you've done that, but I don't think that rises to the same level as being actively involved with an organization.
So further follow-up to that, once you disclose a potential conflict of interest or volunteerism, donation, does that become a matter for executive session to decide whether or not that person should those or not?
Well, only the person can make that decision. That's not a board decision. That is a decision for the individual to make based on what they know about their own situation. For example, if you have made a donation to
Whatever.
Deep Well, again, I don't think the fact that you've supported a charity means that you have some bias. If you're a member of an organization and actively participate in what it does, that I think gets closer to it. But it's something that each member they have to make their own decision about whether or not their activities rise to a level that would make, a reasonable person think they had a bias.
It's a personal decision.
Yes.
Just a quick ethics question. Are sidebar meetings, what is your advice on that? Meetings of 3 people, not a whole committee meeting, but can 3 people get together and talk about, their feelings or opinions on an application?
The Freedom of Information Act prohibits public members from chance or organized meetings to discuss the public's business. So I would recommend against 3 members having a meeting to discuss what might be happening with the committee.
Other questions from the committee?
Does every committee get a review like this of the Freedom of Information Act and what their ethical?
Every committee may, I've done it twice, so.
Thank you, Curtis. Any questions from the committee? Any other discussion?
I would also say, though, that if any member of the committee has a question that is of concern to you, you can certainly contact Josh, who can put you in touch with me, and we can certainly address any questions any members may have.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Questions from the gallery? Go ahead.
I'm gonna take every chance I get, okay?
Question?
My simple take on what we just heard is real easy. You be honest, you follow the law, you recommend to the council for the legal proper use of tax funds, and it doesn't make any difference what you say. Together, separate, email, evidence mail is what we call it. It doesn't make any difference. If you do what's right and you're honest and you have high integrity and you follow the law, and I want to give you you have my name, but I want to give everybody in this room my cell number. I want you to write down my cell number because I'm not going to be allowed, nor am I going to have the time to educate everybody in here and say what I have to say. But I can tell you we have a lot of problems, a lot of illegal funding, and I'm going to share that with everybody. And it's factual. I do not cast opinions. I give you facts. If you're interested in the law, I will be the person that you'll get that from. I will be the most trusted person in this room. So my cell number is 843-384-7260. Call me and I'll give you the truth. But if you follow a lot of this is going on here today, yeah, I mean, you got to be careful. You got to follow the law, period.
Any other questions from the audience?
I just want to say thank you to the town staff for putting this together for us. We really appreciate it. A lot of new faces, something that has been done before. We asked for it and you provided it to us. Thank you very much.
The only other thing is that 2 weeks from tomorrow, the applications need to be on file. Don't be late. Be complete. Thank you for showing up today. This meeting is adjourned.
I thought he was talking directly to us.